I think we can get started. Participants seems to have all stabled. Yeah, there we go. Okay, perfect. All right, welcome everyone to our SRP Sales Reporting Portal training for OASIS Plus. This also includes non-mass, but currently it's OASIS Plus. We're doing the reporting and payment training specifically, right? My name is Han Zhao. I am with Business Ops at PSHC. Keeping the camera on for just a quick second, but I will be turning it off because of bandwidth issues, but just wanted to, say hi to everyone. I will be leading this training, and the slides and the resources will be provided to you at the end of this. I know that's a question everybody has, but you will get a copy of all this, right? So don't worry about that. Okay. So still good with the sharing. All right. So I wanted to touch up make a few brief points here. So this is actually a very condensed training, right? We are primarily focused on three things. That is how to report your task orders in SRP for OASIS Plus contracts, and then how to then do your monthly invoice reporting on those task orders, and finally how to remit the CAF for those invoices that you reported. So we are, finding some issues with the software. We're requiring some additional function testing for the next release. So we are, very appreciative of your patience and understanding and ask for your support and also input to help make it better. And that's kind of why we're all here today as well, right? To ask questions, to get clarifications. So we know what you see on your end that might not be working right, the way that it should be, and then we can ask for those enhancements or look to those fixes on the next releases, right? So the slides I'll be presented here today will also kind of serve more as a visual resource for you guys, right? I'll be kind of, breezing through it. They're very easy to follow. There's screenshots and big letters and everything like that. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Like I said, you'll get a copy of these and you can use this as a resource and follow it step by step and get the same information. The thing that I would ask everyone to pay attention to, however, are the demos, right? So I'll be flipping between the presentation and a live demo to kind of show you where things are. So it makes more sense. Otherwise, looking at the slides might not give you the complete picture, but that's really, the meat of it, right? So that's where we're going. Well, here's where we're going, the table of contents. You can follow that. So briefly here for the SRP support, you can email us the primary source of the primary point of contact, right, for all OASIS Plus type questions goes to that email right there, right? It's OASIS Plus SRP at gsa.gov. So problem with your task order, problem with, payments, reporting, etc., it goes to that email address, right? And somebody will monitor that and reply in a timely manner. For technical assistance, you go to the vendor support center. So the vendor.support@gsa.gov. That's the team that would get you, logged in if you have login issues and things like that. I mean, everybody that's registered for this training here today should have, already logged in, right? That we're hosting this at this training in a kind of limited capacity for all OASIS Plus contractors that already have a task order. So you're already logged in. So this, logging in shouldn't be an issue. But if you encounter any technical issues with SRP itself, vendor support is who you would reach out to. Another good resource is the SRP user manual, which is located at the top of the SRP landing page itself, right? So I'll just briefly show you guys real quick. If we go to the SRP landing page, under this little help tab, we have this GSA online help. If we click on that, it brings you to this nice, this contents here. And what OASIS Plus is this GWAC MAC category of contracts. So everything associated with OASIS Plus should be located here. So you have reporting your sales, adjusting your sales, paying the fee, task order management overview. All very good resources, all, full of information and screenshots, right? So you can follow along. A lot of times when contractors reach out for questions on how to report something or what to do in, various situations, we point them to the appropriate slide or the appropriate page here. So that's a resource at your disposal. Okay. And lastly, right, the GSA OASIS Plus website is listed there, along with other webinars at that registration link. Like I said, again, the training that we're offering here today goes out on a limited basis. So it won't, this type of training won't be posted there, right? This is only for OASIS Plus contractors that have active task orders. So if you don't have active task orders, you wouldn't be invited yet, right? So maybe in the future it'll get posted there as this training takes off. All right. Real quick, a quick overview of the requirements. I mean, you don't have to read all this. This is in everybody's contract. The highlighted stuff is what matters, right? There's two main things to keep in mind. There is monthly sales reporting, and then there's quarterly CAF remittance, right? So monthly schedule, quarterly schedule, right? You report your invoices per task order, active task order on a monthly basis, right? And then you can remit the associated CAF then on a quarterly basis. You can remit your CAF quarterly, but you do not have to. Now, the rule for both of these, for both monthly reporting and quarterly sales report, CAF remittance, is 30 days, right? That's the key. 30 days at the end of the month to report your sales, 30 days at the end of the calendar quarter to remit your CAF, all right? 30 days, not 31 days. That 31st day makes it late, then you'll get a system-generated email from SRP saying that you are delinquent or you're late in payment or reporting, right? So we'll cover that, but this is just the time frame. This is where the requirements come from, okay? All right, so first thing you log in is it takes you to this home page. Now, the important thing I want to to take away from this is gives you like a brief a general overview of your contracts and the deadlines and everything else like that. But be sure that we are selecting your OASIS Plus contract. Now we're doing, sales reporting and task order reporting and fee payment training here, but this is for OASIS Plus. So make sure you're selecting the right contract to take action on. Most of you might hold a mass contract, or maybe you hold multiple OASIS Plus contracts. We want to make sure you select the right one. If we pick the wrong contract to report on by accident, then that becomes the major fix, right? That has to take place, and that takes more time, right? To get that sorted out. So we want to make sure that you pay attention here to which contract that you're selecting. At the top here, at this, you'll also notice that we have some dates, right? Some default dates. So in this example, right? So in this example, the current dates, as you see at the top here, it says July 22nd, right? So July has 31 days, right? So July happens to also be the end. Well, it's the 30 days. It's the month following the end of the second calendar quarter, right? So you'll notice a couple of things here. So we have the monthly reporting, which is in this kind of this, I don't know, rust color box here. It says that the monthly reporting is due by the 30th of July. And then it says the payment is also due by the 30th of July. So July has 31 days, right? So 30 days at the end of the month, 30 days at the end of the quarter is when payment is due. That is when reporting is due as well. The quarter, it just so happens to coincide with the end of the second quarter, right? So the next month you'll see these dates change, but it'll always be, the 30 days at the end of the next month, right? Which will be August to report July sales. So this would be the due date to report June's sales. Just a quick overview and a reminder, right, of when to report, when to pay. So that's actually a pretty useful tool. All right. All right, moving on to task order management. So we'll cover how to enter task orders first, right? So you get your task orders into the system, then you can report on them. There's only two ways to get your task orders into the system. The first way we'll go through is the hard way. It's not the prescribed way, it's the hard way, and it's hard for a reason. And we're going to cover that first because it gives you, shall we say, a greater appreciation for the amount of work that you will need to do if you go this way versus the easy way, which comes next, right? So we'll go through the hard way. You'll understand all the fields that are required once we kind of go through this, right? So very simply, right, you go to add your new task order. So we need to get task orders uploaded into SRP within 30 days of award. So there's that, there's that 30 days again, right? 30 days to report at the end of the month, 30 days to report at the end of the quarter, 30 days to get the task order uploaded into SRP, after award, right? So doing so will allow you to then report on that task order, because if you don't upload the task orders, there's nothing to report on, right? Because there will be a data push from FPDS after you enter this information. This is the hard way, the manual way, right? Once you enter this information, at some point in the near future, FPDS, the contracting officer, will enter that order into FPDS or Assist, and then a data push comes through from that system that bounces all the fields that you entered against all the fields that appear in the system, and there will be a data validation that takes place there. Anything that doesn't match, we'll need to get either corrected or validated or approved. But my office, right, does that to make sure that the data is clean before we can accept that task order through, right? So make sure that, the data is good and clean. And also, it's a good idea when you get a new task order to kind of review the CAF CLIN to make sure that the task order is properly funded. If it's not, right, then we need to reach out to the OCO to get that corrected. As a reminder, the CAF is that fixed fee, right, 0.15% for all OASIS plus conduct task orders. That's the CAF, okay? So go into the, right, well, here are the steps, but basically here's the screenshot. Once you go into SRP to add a new task order, you pop in your contract number, you select your domain, and a bunch of fields start to auto-populate. And then we get into the fun part of, typing in the manual way of, which way, which fields to put in, right? So there's free text fields, right, where you have to type in things like order number. That's a free text field, order description. And then there's drop downs like domain and CLIN, right? So you can use this. It's a combination of those fields and radio buttons to put in all this information. Okay, so if you're going to do this the manual way, you will reference your 1449, right? This is a kind of a blank sheet of what a 1449 looks like, or your award document, maybe a combination of the two, and populate the fields. I mean, all the information should be located in various parts, on this form, but this is kind of the form that you're looking for. And here's the rest of it, right? As you can see, there's a lot of fields, obligation amounts, OCO's name, email, location, right? So lots of information to do. And then afterwards, you go to the bottom, you click on that browse button, and you add the attachments, right? It's necessary for you to attach all relevant award documents for this task order when you input all that data, right? So we have the, we have the source there. Add a description, right? You can X out if it's wrong, re-upload, browse your hard drive or wherever you keep this document, and then you upload, right? And once you upload, it'll show you that. And this is what it looks like. And you notice there's that little a garbage can delete, right? You can still delete it if it's not correct, if you realize you made a mistake. But otherwise, scroll all the way to the bottom and you can click that submit button. I will note, right, that submit button that's at the very end. We'll cover this in a bit in a future slide, but if we reject your task order, it comes back to you for correction and you go through all this again to correct the fields, you have to resubmit, and that's how you resubmit. You scroll all the way to the bottom after you've done all the corrections and you submit again, right? So that's what we mean by resubmit. So that brings us to the end of how to get a new task order on the hard way. So I will demonstrate really quickly. So here is the landing page, right? This is the test environment. So, these are all dummy contracts. We have, the date reminders, right? That the end of January is time to report. January just so happens to be the first reporting payment month of the fourth quarter, right, of 2025. And so it tells me January 30th, I have to pay, right, as well. Pay no attention to this quarterly reporting. That's for, mass contracts. That doesn't really pertain to OASIS Plus. We have a monthly reporting requirement, not a quarterly. So even that's going away. So under task order management, what I just demonstrated, you go to task order management, and then you go to add new task order, right? And once you do that, makes you select from a dropdown your contract number. So this is my dummy OASIS contract number, OASIS Plus rather, and then the domain, right? So these are the domains awarded under this contract. If I select technical and engineering, things start to auto-populate. We have these little icons, information icons that kind of gives you a brief description of, what to put here, right? It's very helpful. Domain, right? You have a drop-down list to choose from, which makes it nice and easy. Crosswalks over to a NAICS, which is also very helpful. Other things are free text fields. So, populate this according to your award document. If we're going to do this, again, the hard way, the manual way, all these fields need to be populated. At the end, here is the attachments, right? Here's where you browse and attach the award documents and the 1449 and anything that you got that you get for the award. And here's that submit button at the end, right? You submit that for approval. So that is how you essentially add a new task order. If it doesn't show up in FPDS, right? This is how you add a new task order, okay? So moving on, let's see. So now we're going to add a new mod, right? So very similar, almost like the exact same process. You can also add a new mod, right? Again, this is the hard way, the manual way to add a new mod, right? We don't prescribe this, right? This is not, unless absolutely necessary, this really isn't the way to go, but it gives you an appreciation of all the fields that are required, right? So again, here's the kind of brief overview of all the mods. Again, with the mods, 30 days, right? Here's that number again, 30 days. When you get the mod awarded, you need to get it into SRP. If it doesn't come through FPDS right away for the data push, then, we might consider this way. Once you add a new mod, right, it's associated, all mods are associated with a task order, right? So the task order that you select for the mod, the information will populate on this left-hand column, and then the mod information you will have to populate on the right-hand column, okay? So, right, and then you go through attachments, right? Same thing. You can browse your hard drive, attach the SF30s, what have you, right? Give them a name, give them a description. Mods follow a naming convention. The first mod is usually P with the 4 zeros, 1. Second mod is P with the 4 zeros, 2, et cetera, et cetera. The initial award of the task order, the base task order itself is mod number 0, which you don't have to enter, but that's what it is for naming convention's sake. And then you submit, right? At the bottom, submit. And similarly, we do a QC check on the details of the mod, right? If it doesn't match what we see, we bounce it back to you for corrections, and then you would make the corrections or, what have you, and resubmit. And that's the same thing. You scroll to the bottom to submit, and that's how we get it modded. So flipping back to SRP, right? Add a new task order, add a new mod, right? It's right under task order. That makes perfect sense. We pick our contract. We have a dummy task order that we already have, right? So we pop that in and we have the mod number P00001, right? First mod. Mod type is a drop-down, funding action, change order, et cetera, closeout. Choose the appropriate type. Give it, the description is there. The pop dates. Now, I'll cover this in a second, right? So we do have an issue with the pop dates. There's a known issue, right? The system is not letting contractors pick the appropriate pop start date for their mods because the pop date of the mod is tied to the base task order, right? So obviously, what you would put there would be the same pop start date as end date as your task order. However, because the start date might be older than the award date of the mod, it's triggering some kind of data error, and it's not allowing contractors to do that. And so what some contractors are doing is just kind of popping in today's date or whatever date that is present to kind of push it through, right? To make it go through. What we're discovering is that's creating issues, right? Where it's affecting the base task order's pop date. And as we'll discuss later when you're reporting your sales, it's going to create issues on how you can report your sales. So we know this is an issue. It's in the fix, right? Hopefully it gets fixed soon. But uh, what we want is if everything gets fixed and it works, great, right? Like we can go through with this method, but because we know that this issue exists as of today, what we would ask you to do, what I ask you to do, is wait for the mod to come through from FPDS, right? The FPDS data push will clean this up and fix that date problem. But nonetheless, right, that is something we're aware of, and it is a required field, as you can see, right? So we have to pop that in. As we go through, we can see, right, we can do the attachments and, the same exact structure, right? At the bottom, we have the submit button, right? So we need to submit the mod for approval for, QC check after the data fields get fixed, right? So that's same exact layout, right? So it should be pretty easy to follow. All right, so now that we did it, now we did it the hard way. Let's go through the way that it's prescribed, right? So the way that this should work is that a data push, you get awarded a task order or a mod within a couple of days. Contracting officer goes into FPDS or assist, right? And they populate all the contract information or the task order information, and then that automatically feeds into SRP. So you wouldn't have to type in any of this information. It would just come straight in from FPDS. You double check it and then, and then push it through for validation. That's the prescribed way, right? So that's the way we recommend. So the only reason you would go to do it the manual way, the hard way, is if it doesn't come through FPDS for whatever reason, or it's taking a long time and you're kind of pushing up against that 30-day deadline to get your task order or your mod into SRP for reporting, right? So yes, this kind of outlines what I just mentioned. I will make a note here, and I'm gonna kind of speak in riddles here a little bit. And that's that note at the bottom, right? Now, if there is a special reason why the OCO is not reporting that task order into FPDS, like I mentioned, please reach out at the email listed there to discuss, right? Now, special reason, if you have a task order with a special reason, you will understand why it's a special reason. If you don't have a task order with a special reason is a task order, let's say, that can't be shared out so publicly, for example, right? Kind of saying it without saying it there. But yeah, if you have one of those, reach out and we can discuss the details and get that into the reporting requirement, right, is still there. It's just we'll have to figure out a way to do it, right, in a compliant way, right? So just FYI. But FPDS data push comes through this way, right? You can see there's the required field right there, right? In SRP, those are the fields that are required, and FPDS feeds most of those fields. Things like the domain CLIN or the predominant contract type, those are not going to show up in FPDS, so that's going to require you to type in. But we'll show that in a bit. But you can see it covers like most of the field information that you would have had to type in manually, right? And in FPDS, you can see it here, right? If you go to FPDS, you type in your task order number, you find the task order with the, right here, you see the little 0, right? 0 is the base task order. And you click on the view link, it goes into the details and all the details are listed there, which trigger this feed, right? And that's where the information comes from. I will note, when we do a data quality check, that's what we're checking as well. I'm going into FPDS, I'm looking at what shows up on those fields, and if I see a conflict in there, I'm going to question it. I'll test, I'll reject the task order back to you for a fix, asking you to double check to make sure, the date signed is the right date, right? Because I see it in FPDS as this date and you entered a different dates, who's correct. FPDS might not always be correct, right? If you have the appropriate task order documentation to show that indeed the information you put in was correct, resubmit it, right? And that's that submit button at the bottom. Make the changes that you need, keep the changes that you don't need to change, and push that through, and then follow up with the task orders that got uploaded, and you can demonstrate that to me, and I'll approve it, right? And then we can go with the reporting. Same thing with assist, assisted acquisition. It's, comes through as well, the same kind of way. Domain, CLIN, domain, is not included on the data push, but it comes through super quick, and it comes through the same way as FPDS does, right? All right. So, so we have to adjust the locked fields, right? So what that means is once the data push comes through, we need to make some adjustments, right? So we have to make sure that all the data, I mean, even if it comes through from FPDS, we don't know 100% that it's clean. And that's this little, option here. So if you check this, you can go through and make changes to any of the fields that don't seem correct. I think FPDS, the recent task orders that I've seen, has the city and state issue fixed, right? So that's good. But if you see anything that, that FPDS didn't push through cleanly, or, is just completely wrong because maybe somebody typed in the wrong information in FPDS, you have that ability to make that change. It will, of course, trigger a data check notice on my end, because it's going to say there's a difference, right? We don't know which one's correct, which one's wrong. FPDS shows one thing, you're typing in another thing, and so we would need to have that discussion or that communication to determine, which one to accept, right? And I will also note, it's easier now. It's just simpler and quicker to work with you, the vendor, to get those changes done, so I can accept everything that you put in, right? Rather than, correcting what's in FPDS, because that's going to involve way too many parties with the vendor. It's just me and you, right? We have a discussion. You show me what you have in terms of documentation. I can see that the data fields are great. And you put in exactly what we want to see. And then I can accept your fields, and the task order goes into SRP. Okay. All right. Review task order and mods. All right. So we are here. You'll note that with the review task order mods, this is one of the menu options. This is where new orders go. This is where rejected orders go, right? Like all your task orders show up here, right? So it's important to check this regularly, right? You'll notice that there's a task order status here, right? Non-mass accepted is what we want. Everything should be non-mass accepted by the end of the day, right? If it's not non-mass accepted, that means an action needs to take place, because that task order is not reportable yet, right? So you'll notice here, non-mass accepted correlates to this view task order, right? Which means it's a clean task order. We have a new task order, right, at the bottom here, and the action that you can take there is to manage that task order. This new task order is a data push from FPDS. That's what that means, right? That means FPDS, you were awarded a new task order, contracting officer put that information into FPDS, the data push came in, it's an SRP. You need to then go through, right, back here, make any adjustments, right, make changes that you need, and submit it, right? You scroll to the bottom, you submit it for data validation. And then I have to take a look at it, or somebody on my team takes a look at it and validates it. Prior to that, this new task order is not reportable. You can't find it, right, except on this page. So please, if you have a new task order, utilize that managed task order. You need to take action on it. Similarly, you see at the very top here, it says non-mass rejected. That means the task order data that we reviewed and we found an issue with, or we needed you to make a correction on, so we pushed it back to you, right? We rejected it, we pushed it back to you for corrections. You need to also manage that task order and make the changes exactly the same way, right? Make the changes into the fields that, require the changes, provide documentation, contact me, talk to me, show me what you're seeing. And then you need to submit it again, right, for approval. And at the end, everything goes into non-accepted status if all the data is cleaned, which is what we're trying to do here, right? So pay attention to that, right? Very important. I just want to also show you real quick on the landing page where that is, right? So we are still under task order management. We did add new task order, right? We did add new mod. Underneath of that is the review task order mods, right? This is where all your task orders are for your OASIS Plus contracts, right? So make sure everything here is in non-mass accepted status. You get a new task order, it'll show up here, right? You get a rejected task order, it'll show up here. Take action on it, resubmit it, right? And then we can get that cleaned up. Okay. All right, so going through some of the, terminology here. So we talked about new task order. We talked about non-mass accepted, non-mass reviewed when you get the data from FPDS, and then we submit it. Then you submit it for validation. It goes into like a review status. That's when, that's the time between when you submit it for review and I'm looking at it right before I accept it or reject it. Review task order happens if there is an existing task order and we have a data push come through, or rather that's the accepted one. Review task orders if you need to take action on it, right? Because something got reviewed and it's pushed back. But here's the quick, simple flow chart, right, to follow. If the data push comes from FPDS, right, it goes into new order status. You need to take action on it, then submit it for review, right? So it's in the review status. Hopefully everything is clean, and then it goes into non-mass accepted. You'll notice all the nodes end with non-mass accepted. That's what we want at the end of the day. If it gets pushed back, it gets rejected, then it goes back into review task order status when you submit it again, right, for corrections. And then finally, right, it gets accepted because, we made all the right changes. If you added a task order, the mod, the hard way, the first way that we talked about, right, it goes into non-mass accepted status right away, right? So you can start reporting on it. That's kind of, the logic that was built behind that because it's not coming through from FPDS. We need to start reporting on it. Let's get it in the system. Okay, so now we can start report on it. And then it goes into accepted to review status when the data comes in from FPDS at some later date, right? It'll create that kind of data bounce. And let's say you put in all the information correctly, then we're in non-mass accepted status. So that's clean, that's great. But more often than not, there is some kind of data issue. So we reject it or, need you to make corrections because the contracting officer put it in a different way or, we didn't put it in exactly the right way. And then again, if it follows the same path, we need to review the task order again after it gets rejected. And then we finally accept it when the data gets cleaned up, right? So end of the day, right, takeaway is non-mass accepted is what we want to be. All right. So we got mods in, we got task orders in. Now it's time to do report. So reporting your sales. So a few things I want to mention here, right? 30 days, right? At the end of the month, you need to report your sales. We report on task orders. OASIS Plus, we report on task orders, not contracts, right? So if you have a task order, then you must report on that task order. If you do not have a task order, if your OASIS Plus contract does not have a task order awarded, there is no reporting requirement, right? Because there's nothing to report, right? There's not even zero to report. There's no task order there. It has to be a task order awarded before you need to report. After a task order or multiple task orders are awarded, all those task orders, right, need to be reported on, including zero sales. Now, OASIS Plus contracts recognize revenue at the time of payment. If you were paid this month, then you have something to report, right? Then you report that dollar amount. If you were not paid this month on an active task order, right? Like let's say you just invoiced this month and you get paid later, you report a zero, even if you just invoiced this month. It's at the time of payment, right? So when you need to receive payment first before you report any dollar amount, all other cases are $0 reports. In the case where you do not have a task order awarded, there is no reporting requirement. You do not report. There's nothing to report on, right? I just want to make that point abundantly clear. I think there was some confusion recently about that. So that's how OASIS Plus works, right? So I made a little note here, right, just to be extra clear and bold. There's no reporting requirement if there's no task orders awarded, right? Yeah, I mean, you'll note this in the system too. When you go through this process to try to report and you do the task order drop down and there's no, nothing to select, there's no reporting requirement. There's no task orders awarded, right? So that's kind of like a double check on yourself. So there's also two ways to do reports, right? We're going to cover the first way and then we'll go into the second way. First way is form entry, which is, the easier way, I think, depending on the volume of your sales. If you have, manageable number of task orders and a manageable number of line items per task order, form entry is probably the way to go, right? A file upload is more of a template. We'll cover that. But anyway, so you go to the reporting section, form entry, right? Pick your contract number. Things auto-populate there, right? That's nothing new. And right, and then at the bottom, you can select your task order again. If you have no task orders awarded, there's no reporting requirement. That drop down is not going to show up with anything. Also, importantly, as a double check, remember we said, right, non-mass accepted, right? If the task order is rejected or it's a new task order that you didn't put through data validation, it wouldn't be selected here either, right? So good rule of thumb is to double check. Go to that review uh, task order mod option that I showed before, just to double check everything is already, in non-mass accepted status before you come through here, on a monthly basis, so you can make sure that you can have the capability to report on everything that you need to report on. Okay. So you add the invoices. So we cover this again. $0 invoice, $0 invoices have have this naming convention, zero invoice, quarter, year, right? And you push that through. There is an option for that to submit that $0 invoice, and you need to do that if you didn't receive payment on the task order, right? And also as an aside for $0 invoices, I just want to say that well, the pay date doesn't, it doesn't really, it's a $0 invoice, right? So I think for the sake of simplicity, the pay date can just be the end of the month, right? Pick that date, that's safe. So we can add invoices, delete invoices. This is form entry, by the way. So there are drop downs here with sins, right? And it'll auto-populate once you select certain sins. So if you select a $0 invoice sin, right, it'll carry all these fields pretty much all the way through, right? So it'll be nice and easy that way. All right. Kind of gives you examples of what those fields are. So and I will note this too, every single invoice you'll see here on this $0 invoice example as well. At the bottom here, this D00, $0 invoice is an F00 SIN, right? SIN CLIN. It's a drop down. You'll see that on this form. Every single invoice, no matter if it's a $0 invoice or firm fixed price or time and material, must have the omnipresent D00 CAF line, right? So you would add a new line right here, add new line after you pop in the $0 invoice or, your time and material or what have you. You have to add a new line and you have to always include the CAF line on all your invoices, all right? That's a requirement for OASIS Plus sales reporting. And then you submit the invoice, click through, and you'll notice here that we have two kinds of CAFs, right? We have the SRP CAF and we have the CAF CLIN. 99% of the time, these two numbers should match, right? And you should double check to make sure that they do match, right? The SRP CAF is a system calculated number. What it does is it takes all the lines that are not D00 on this invoice, right? Like these two 500 figures, and then takes it and then multiplies it by the 0.15% to show what CAF there ought to have been, right? Based on the labor that was charged or right that was invoiced there or paid. The CAF CLIN is the number that you inputted down here, right? Or what you charge the customer on that invoice. So that should match 99% of the time. There's few exceptions to that rule, but I don't think anybody's going to encounter that at just quite yet. So just as a double check, right? Make sure that those two numbers are clean. Right. Okay. and go through submits, right? You can add new task orders on the reports. You can add new task orders. You can, go back here, new invoice number, make sure they're unique, different pay date and a different task order or whatever the associated pay date is. And then you can report the next task order, right? So all the task orders that show up on this dropdown, you need to report on. Zeros, what have you, okay? And if you made a mistake, of course, you can delete your invoice. You can view the status, and this is what shows up on the search function, right? If I search for your contract number, if you search for your contract number, you will see all your active task orders and how you've reported. If something wasn't reported, it'll show that here too. Things that get paid, right? All right, so that was form entry, and you can make adjustments too, right? You can adjust your data. Just be aware when you adjust your data, it will replace the existing data, right? Everything that you inputted, it'll replace. So make sure you pick the right fields to make the adjustments. So let me just real quick go back to a demo of reporting. So we're done with task order management because all the task orders are in there clean. Now we're in reporting, and form entry is here, right? That's what we're talking about. So we pick form entry, pick our contract, give an invoice number, choose a pay date, and choose a task order. And I only have one task order to report on, right? So this is what I'm going to do. And you basically click add an invoice. I kind of created this one already. And this is what it looks like, right? You got a HOO for fixed rate, fixed price, right? You can get a drop down, zero invoice, right? CAF special, which is again, not very common. You would usually do CAF, right? Zero invoice fixed, travel, indirect costs, and then you down here after ancillary labor, you see all these labor categories. Make sure you pick the right one. This is for time and material, right? We'll cover that in a little bit. What time and material, there's a skill level that's associated, which you would pick. So like, let's say, for example, I picked a postmaster, right? And I have to choose a skill level, junior, journeyman, senior. So I mean, it's usually drop downs. It's pretty easy to work with drop downs. So this is again the cleaner way, the easier way. And of course, always include a CAF line. This line ID can be unique. You can type that in. You decide what that is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 makes the most sense. So you can follow that as well. Invoice number has to be unique. That's what I meant to say. Unit of measure, all that, just pre-populates, right? So kind of go through that, double check it, submit, right? Adjust your data. You can adjust the data here as well, right? So that's the adjust data, not by file upload. For form entry only, it's adjust data, right? The first options, in these doubles are always form entry, associated with form entry, right? So, oops, what we want to do here. All right, so we're adjusting data. Just be aware that when you adjust your data, it replaces all the previous data. So we want to make sure that you get all the information in there. Like it's going to rewrite what you previously reported with what you adjusted, right? So this, if you need to adjust, this is how you can do it. And then there's a brief questionnaire at the end of every sales adjustments, right? How did you discover this error, and what are the reasons, and how do you plan on preventing it in the future? Standard questions, answer them as you see fit. All right, so now we go into file upload. All right, file upload, I would recommend if you have a significant amount of line items and to deal with. My recommendation is use this method, create a template, right? And then you keep it, and it just makes life easier because what you do from month to month may not be all that different. You might make a few adjustments on hours or maybe add a new labor category every now and then, but more or less the information is the same. So you can kind of, use that template. So that's, that's the pros of using this method. The cons are this. There are a lot of rules with this, right? There are no drop downs with this. This is an Excel spreadsheet, basically. You need to make sure the data is clean on this thing, right? So one, you download this template, making no changes to this template. The system, the SRP will reject this template immediately if you make any changes to it. Only enter data. make sure you enter the data under the MAC GWAC MAC data tab, right? Not the mass data tab, not the instruction tab, this last tab. That's where all the data for OASIS Plus contracts go. Don't do anything. Don't add formulas in here. Don't do macros. Don't do what I did here with the colors. Don't do any of that. Just put the raw data in there. Keep that template clean, and then you can use it from month to month. The only reason I made it colorful is to kind of illustrate this example. You can see here, same contract, right? This is my dummy OASIS Plus contract. I have unique contract number to invoice numbers for each of these three task orders. Right, we got the dates in there, line IDs, the CLINs. So I did an example of the baby blue with firm fixed price. Then I did an example with time and material, right? We got the skill level there. The SIN CLINs are associated there as well, right? Descriptions as the labor categories. Unit of measure is HRC. Like all this information you're going to have to look up and put in your, right? And then I have a zero invoice for this last task order, which, again, you put in all this information yourself. This is what a file upload looks like, right? So want to maybe just touch briefly on that. Let me go to the demo real quick. So file upload is here. It's right under form entry. And if you want to adjust your data, which we'll cover, in a little bit, it's down here. Adjust data by file upload, right? So you got to do the data changes, in accordance to how you reported it, right? The adjustments, if that makes sense. So you can download the template here, right? Or if you go to file upload, there ought to be, I guess it's not there anymore. So you can upload you download the template. The template is pretty comprehensive. Let's see if I can show an example of it on the landing page. You can download it from the landing page as well. It's this one, the fast SRP Excel template. Looks like this. Don't do anything. Like, again, reporting instructions are here. It kind of links back to the instructions I showed you before under this help tab, right under the GSA help. When you report your data, reports, file upload, here's all the instructions on what to fill in for each of the fields, right? It's the same instructions on here under the reporting instructions tab. We're not doing the mass tab, we're doing the GWAC MAC tab, right? And here are all the fields that we must put in. Anything with the asterisk next to it is required. So, make sure you type in all the right information and keep a clean copy of this thing, right? Because if it gets rejected, you have a chance to fix it and re-upload it, right? But just make sure that, when you get this in there, it's clean on the first try if you can. At the bottom here, I'm going to talk about T&M real quick, time and material. OASIS Plus, section J1, outlines all the labor categories for T&M, time and material, right? So if you click on that, where it takes you to, have it open already, this document, J1, and here it goes, J1 goes into the four levels of experience: junior, journeyman, senior, SME, right? And linked through J1 is this BLS document. BLS document goes, that's the Standard Occupation Classification Manual for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And it's a 300-page, close to 300-page document, but that's only because it kind of repeats itself a bunch of times. The information is, pretty standard. Where is it? Here we go. Here are all the labor categories, right? So this SOC code, right, the 19-3039, that is the SIN CLIN for SRP reporting. And then here's the labor category description. Quick note, anything that says all other is for us, right? We would ask you to not use that if at all possible, right? All other, we have found, that it's just an easy catch-all. People just start using all other for everything. Try not to do that, right? If it's a psychologist, what type of psychologist, right? Like, try to be more specific. I think if you can find a better description than all other, please do, right? Don't just default to that. I can't tell you how many manager, all others we've seen on the legacy OASIS side of the house, which uses a very similar document, or if not the same one, right? So try not to do that. Utilize the more specific, labor category that's outlined here. It helps with our data quality greatly in the future, right? It's definitely the way to go for us. Okay. All right, so we talked about, yeah, you browse, you find the template, you upload it, and if it gets rejected, right, it'll show that it gets rejected and it'll tell you why it got rejected. And so you go back and you make those appropriate corrections and you try to upload it again, right? So it's pretty helpful in that regard, I should say. All right, and to adjust the data, it's the same thing, right? So you go to adjust data file upload, you would basically upload a new file that would replace the existing file and all the data fields, right? So that's why if you're going this route, I would suggest you keep a copy of the file that you uploaded so you don't, let's say, lose that data on an adjustment, right? All right, and the same questionnaire comes up. How was this, error discovered, and how do you prevent it in the future? Answer that right? Answer that accordingly. Um, all right. I think I missed the point here. I will reiterate this point before we make a payment. All right, I missed the point. Any missed sales, if you missed a sale or you missed a month of sales reporting, you must go back and report that past month or all the past month that you missed before you proceed with the present reporting. That is 100% important because the system will not allow you to report on your current task or your current period unless you go back and you report the ones that you missed. All right. So not, there could be reasons why, but I mean, every month you should be reporting, zero or something, right? But, say the person who reports goes on vacation and forgets one particular month, we would have to go back and you would have to make that report, right, in that past month first before proceeding on with the current month, right? And we don't want to be perpetually late either, right? So just wanted to make that point. It's a very important point, and I shouldn't have forgotten to mention that. Okay, now we are on to making payments because we've reported everything, right? So we got the task orders in, invoices are in. Now let's make a payment. Pretty self-explanatory. We are under the make a payment tab, right? So you under payments, you click make a payment, and then you can see what's outstanding. Select the appropriate contract number. Now you pay on the contract level now, right? But it shows you all the task order. You report on the task order level, but you can pay on the contract level because it all gets rolled up, but you can see the individual task orders down here. Now, there are a few options you can choose. So we have, I'll show you, well, here's the descriptions of each. You got the SRP CAF, the CAF CLIN, or other, right? We recommend CAF CLIN is the one that you select. Like I said before in the previous slide about reporting invoices, SRP CAF and the CAF CLIN should be the same 99% of the time. CAF CLIN is what you charge to the customer, right? And so the customer remitted that CAF to you, you as the contractor forward that CAF onto us, right? So that's why CAF CLIN makes the most sense. SRP CAF is just a system calculated CAF that might not be, I mean, that should match the CAF CLIN, but when in doubt, CAF CLIN is the way to go. Okay. Another is, special situation if we need to make adjustments, which I, hope we never have to do ever again. So we have those options here, and you see the CAF CLIN is, the radial button you choose, and, and then and we can see CAF CLIN, the corresponding column there, right? So that's where that's what those numbers mean, right? The period, so this is for Q4 of 2021. They'll all the individual months, all the task orders that were active that generated CAF can be selected, and then you click Pay Now. Now, here's another very important thing I want to mention. Going through this process, it will take, SRP does make this payment through pay.gov. You as the contractor, do not go through pay.gov directly, because if you do, we will lose track. There's no way to tie that monetary amount that you just paid in pay.gov back to this contract, back to those task orders. All right. It creates a huge problem in tracking down the sales, right? So make sure when you report, when you make the payments, do it through SRP. Carry the process all the way through, click all the buttons, submit, pay now, what have you, right? Do it that way, and we would have clean, reliable data, and we keep track of it, and we know where the payment is, and we know that it's been remitted, and you're not late or delinquent on payments. This is really the only way. All right, so please do that with your CAF payments. Select the checkbox at the bottom, you can submit, and then it'll take you to the next page for, payments. You got a few options there. You have, bank account ACH, it's unlimited. Amazon account, there's limits to that. I don't know anybody who would use Amazon accounts. PayPal is capped at 10,000. A debit card or credit card is capped at under 25K. Okay, fill in the information, takes you to the next screen, fill in the information, continue, click agree, and then it gets submitted, right? And then the payment, you'll see gets received, and we have confirmation, and then your outstanding balance goes to zero. So their payment at that point is complete. Okay, so pretty straightforward. And then anything that's pending hasn't, is still pending. Again, the payment requirement is 30 days at the end of the quarter. Might take a few days to process if it's like pending, for example. So, try to do it a couple days before the end of the 30th. So the payment is delinquent. Like if it gets received on the 31st day, it's considered delinquent, right? So timeliness is being tracked. You want to be on time with these kinds of payments. Okay. All right. And if you look up the contract number, you can see all the pending payments, right? All right, so that brings us to the end for questions. I don't think I have any more live demos. That pretty much covers all the three functions that we wanted to do. So let's see if there are questions in the Q&A. See, Christy's been great at answering them, I think, while I was doing the presentation. Let's see. And a copy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a copy of the questions might be provided as well. Sub K reporting, known glitch. Yes, I know about this. Yep. Yeah, so it can't be edited once submitted. Sub K reporting, make sure you're doing the correct report. Certain contractors, they reported the whole amount up front, and then now they're going back and reporting the monthly, and now it looks like it's double counting. It's not true that it can't be edited. It can. There's no direct way to get it edited. We recently did get something fixed for a contractor, but it took, conversations with the IT team, the development team, and screenshots and this and that. So it can be done. It's just not easy. So again, questions or concerns, right? So sub-K reporting, send them to that OASIS Plus SRP mailbox, right? We'll take a look at it. We'll work with you to, get that sorted out. We just have to provide them with the screenshots of the known issue, of the task order, the specific line items, and then they'll go in and clean that up. But yes, we're aware of that. Hopefully that's a future enhancement that allows like an edit button, say, for example, that'd be awesome. But yes, that is 100% an issue that we're aware of and we'll tackle hopefully soon. Anything else? I know we're kind of, over, but we started a few minutes late, so I don't mind hanging around a little bit later. Yes, the slides will definitely be made available. Yeah, so everything I showed you here today, I breezed through the slides. I just wanted to talk and show you the demo, but yes, the slides absolutely will be made available. You're very welcome. All right. Anything else? If you come up with a question later, feel free to send it to the mailbox, right? I mean, I'm looking at it too. So if you don't get me today, you'll get me on that mailbox. Or you'll get me next month, right? I think it's on a monthly cadence, these trainings. All right. Thank you, everyone.